Welcome to End of Life University podcast, where we share real talk about life and death. I'm your host, Dr. Karen Wyatt. Thanks for joining me here for episode number 294. In just a few moments, I'll be sharing with you an interview I did with my friend Merilynne Rush, and she talks all about how to hold a virtual funeral, and this is really personal for her, having just recently held a virtual funeral for her father. She has tons of really good tips and information for those of us who might be needing to set up such an event. So I think you'll really enjoy my conversation with Merilynne. I have a few announcements before then. First of all, this is the month of April, and April 16th is coming up soon, which is National Healthcare Decisions Day. I'm partnering with Vital Decisions on their campaign to pick a proxy and plant a tree. So please join me this month in choosing your healthcare proxy to be your voice in a medical crisis. Speak with them about your wishes, and then go to mylivingvoice.com to create a free account and document your wishes online. And anyone who does this during the month of April will have a tree planted to honor this step forward. So the goal for Vital Decisions is to plant 1,000 trees this month. So I've signed up and named my proxy, so I hope you'll join me. Pick a proxy and plant it forward. And again, you go to mylivingvoice.com. I'll also leave a link to that on the show notes for this episode at eolupodcast.com. And then my second announcement is to remind you there is a workshop coming up with Ben Kintish, who's the creator of Life Review, the Hospice musical. I interviewed him a few weeks ago, and I'm hosting Ben to do a workshop on grieving and growing together through stories and songs. He's going to be performing some of the numbers from the musical, Life Review, the Hospice musical, but also talking about how grief has been a theme of that musical and of his work in hospice. That workshop is coming up on Sunday, April 25th at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. Tickets will be $20, and this is a fundraiser. Half the proceeds are going to the Denver Hospice. The other half are going to Life Review, the Hospice musical, to help support that musical getting out to the world. So again, if you come to the show notes, eolupodcast.com, I'll leave a link that you can click on in order to register to take part in this workshop. And you can also go to this short link. It's a bit.ly link. So it's bit.ly/hospice musical, but the H of hospice and the M of musical are both capitalized, and the other letters are lowercase, and it's all one word. So bit.ly/hospice musical, capital H and capital M on those two words. So that's a shortened link if you want to go there directly. Otherwise, just come to the show notes, eolupodcast.com. So I hope you join us for that workshop. Because it's going to be a lot of fun. Ben is a riot, and I really enjoy working with him. So looking forward to that. And also, I have a new patron to thank, Heather Capuano. Thank you so much for signing up on my Patreon page to be a supporter of the podcast and helping me to keep the podcast going and keep it on the air. If you're interested in learning more about that, you can go to my page at Patreon, patreon.com/EOLU. Thank you, Heather, and all the other people who've been supporting the podcast for the last few years. So now we'll move on to the interview with Merilynne Rush. And as always, stay tuned afterward. I'll come back with a few takeaways and to say goodbye. So here we go. Today, I am so happy to be welcoming back my return guest, Merilynne Rush. And Merilynne was actually, I don't know if you remember this, Merilynne, but you were actually one of the very first people I interviewed when I first started doing this back in 2013. And I had no idea what I was doing. And I interviewed you about Death Cafe, which I had never heard of before and knew nothing about. And and home funerals, which also I'd never heard of before and knew nothing about. And you were so kind and gracious, Merilynne, to help me through that first interview. And so it's been a fun privilege to have you back again.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I remember it well. It's been a wonderful few years and staying in touch with you, Karen, and I so appreciate all that you're doing.
Well, thank you, Merilynne. And for our listeners who aren't familiar with Merilynne, I'll tell you a little bit about her. Excuse me. She's an end-of-life doula mentor and business consultant, a home funeral guide, green burial educator, advanced care planning facilitator, death cafe host and educator, a former hospice nurse, and former home birth midwife. Merilynne has had an amazing career, and she brings together all these pieces in one place, which is incredible. She was president of the National End-of-Life Doula Alliance, is a founding member of the NHPCO End-of-Life Doula Counselor, and the current vice chair of that group, and served on the board of directors of the Green Burial Council, the National Home Funeral Alliance, Michigan Doula Connection, and the Washtenaw Health Initiative Advanced Care Planning Committee. And Merilynne now has a program called The Dying Year, and her website is thedyingyear.org. So, Merilynne, the last time we talked, it was almost exactly a year ago to the date, the last time we connected. And at that time, I think all of us were still trying to find our footing in the midst of this pandemic and figure out where we were and what was going on and what was going to be happening. So how are you now this year?
Wow. It's hard to believe it's been a year and everything has changed so much. And I'm just hanging on every conversation that I'm having with people about the depth of what we can do together, given our current circumstances, especially with gatherings that are online. And so our topic today about virtual memorial gatherings or funerals is so appropriate. And also, I'm struck by what everybody's saying about how things are never going to go back to the same as we were before.
It's so true. And that, for me, it reminds me of my own process through grief. Each time I've been through grief, I think that's been the hard reality I've had to accept is things will never go back to the way they were before. And I just have to keep moving one moment at a time and see what comes next.
I really believe in the transformation that can happen through loss and the growth, and how we can reach a higher plane if we have the luxury of being able to process our grief and be with it. And, we receive, we're in a safe enough place to look at all we've lost and our feelings are validated. Then all of this could be a very transformational experience. And I don't think it's a bad thing that we are all transforming in so many ways in our country and in the world these days. We need to.
It's true. And we're transforming really at the same time. We're going through this experience together, which is remarkable in so many ways as we think about it.
And it makes me think of what you're doing with EOL University, Karen, is helping bring people together to process all of that and learn and grow together and have a forum for this group transformation. So appreciative to you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's showing us how valuable online platforms are in an entire year of not being able to get together in person, which is incredible when you think about it. And but I was wondering about your work, Merilynne, and how you've adapted and what you have going on in terms of the trainings that you're offering and the things that you're involved in that have also had to move online.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've adapted my doula training to be entirely online, and I'm actually really finding a lot of fulfillment with that in that venue. For one thing, it means that the cost is much less because people don't have to travel here physically to where I am. I've had people from Singapore and Italy and Germany and all over taking the online doula training, because we meet online at a set time for a set number of hours each week. And we come together as a community, and just the process of doing that, meeting live all together on we use the Zoom platform, has been absolutely wonderful, much more so than I thought it would have been. I thought there would have been so much lost, but it's been really great, actually.
And that reminds me that this online platform makes it accessible really to anyone from anywhere. And it really, in some ways, dissolves some of the barriers that might have been there before with in-person training.
Right, as long as people have access to internet connection and a computer or the equipment, an iPad or something, a tablet that they can use. So that is the one barrier. Yeah.
And so do you have a training coming up? A new training starting?
Yeah, I have. My trainings are 5 weeks long, and we meet once a week for 3.5 hours. And then there's a 75-page study guide that people are sent to prepare that contains preparations for each of the weeks. And so I have one starting on April 20th. It's going to be on Tuesdays. I live in the Eastern time zone, and it's going to meet from 4:30 to 8 p.m. on Tuesdays, starting April 20th. I also have an advanced care planning 1 day long, 5.5 hour online facilitator training on May 6th, on Thursday, May 6th. That is a skill that many people are confused about, because everybody knows they should do their advanced directives, but what really makes them more likely to be followed is if the individual who's filling out their, advanced directive has had a conversation with the person they've chosen to be their healthcare advocate. And so the facilitator learns how to facilitate them talking to each other, because so many times we take shortcuts in conversation, or we don't know how to thoroughly examine all the issues, and the facilitator learns very specific techniques to guide that conversation, so it's really deep and meaningful. And then that makes it more likely that person, if need be, will be able to carry out the person's decisions. Whereas in absence of that conversation, it's less likely. So it's a very specific facilitator training, and I do that probably 6 times a year.
That facilitator role is so important, because we know from surveys that most people say they want to have these conversations. They know it's important. They realize they should have the conversations, and yet they don't do it. And because it's too difficult to kind of overcome some of the obstacles they find. So there's so much value in having a facilitator who's already trained and can just help people get to that conversation.
And it's a great skill for end-of-life doulas, for anybody working in any healthcare setting, for people in their faith communities. Just so many. Any lay person can learn that skill.
I would love to see it if every primary care doctor's office had one staff member who would take this kind of training and be able to do the facilitation, because it's clear that the doctors, and PAs or nurse practitioners themselves don't really have enough time to do that kind of facilitation. But if they had just had someone in their office who could offer it, it could change everything for their patients.
Or even if there was someplace in the community that you could go to that wasn't associated with the healthcare system, because there might be some barriers associated with that. So if it was an independent place you could go to have facilitated conversations, it would be, I think, even more normalizing the conversation.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because it shows these conversations go way beyond just medical care anyway. It isn't just about medical care. There's so much more involved.
Right. Some of the other things I've been involved in is my end-of-life doula research just got published a few months ago. Yeah, I was looking at, with my co-investigator, we were looking at the roles and specific practices of end-of-life doulas. It's the first international study that's looked at this, comparing and contrasting the views of key stakeholders and early innovators. And we looked at people in the United States, in Canada, in the UK, and in Australia. These are the countries that appear to be the most active, where end-of-life doulas are the most active. And we asked questions like about their professional background and the ways they describe the doula role and practices, why there's been such a growing interest in end-of-life doulas, and current and future considerations for integrating them into mainstream practice, and just variations. So that's been really exciting. People can access that. It was published in the Journal of Palliative Care and Social Practice, which is open access, so anybody can access that. So I'll send you the link.
Oh, nice.
And we're going to do some more based on our data. We're going to publish some more follow-up articles. And then also I am vice chair, as you mentioned, of the End-of-Life Doula Advisory Council through the NHPCO. And we just launched our COVID grief support program. That is doulas providing grief support. And we're especially targeting marginalized and underserved communities to provide one-on-one grief support. The goal is to meet that doulas are matched with participants to have up to hour-long conversations up to 4 times. And they really focus on hearing their story and providing resources for them and just what their grief journey is like. So that there's a lot of kind of group support that's out there, and there's a lot of support for healthcare providers, but we don't know very many other grief support programs for individuals that are one-on-one. And this is free and accessible to all and confidential. So that's also a really exciting project. People can learn more by going to the NHPCO End of Life Doula Council website page.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. I'm so glad to hear that. I think there's a huge need for that. As we know, we're facing an incredible deluge of grief issues in this coming year as we all keep moving through this pandemic. So that sounds wonderful. I will leave links for all of these things in the show notes for this episode so everyone can go there to find them. So thanks for sharing all of those resources with us, Merilynne. And then for our topic today, we were going to talk about virtual memorial services and funerals. And you sent me an article that you wrote. And until I read it, I didn't actually realize, Merilynne, that your father died this year and that what you're writing about is really your own personal experience of an online memorial for your dad. And I'm so grateful to you that you're willing to share this. I can imagine how tender this story is, and I'm so grateful that you would share with us that experience today.
Thank you for the opportunity, Karen. I have found so much loving support through being able to share, our experiences are our best teachers, and it's been helpful to me to do that. So I thank you for this opportunity. And I want to pass on what I learned to others.
Yes, and it's so valuable, and even more valuable that you, as a participant and as someone grieving who experienced this memorial service virtually online. And so I'm eager to hear what you would like to share with us about that. And I know you have lots of tips, but maybe first of all, talk about what was it like for you grieving your dad to be doing it online over Zoom?
Well, I want to start out by sharing a quote from Stephen Birnbaum of the New York Times, who published an article, I think in January, called How to Hold a Virtual Memorial Service. It was January 14th in the New York Times. And he said, I feared that such funerals would be alienating, but I was wrong. Wi-Fi carries the love quite effectively. And
Oh,
that sums it up for me, that, I don't think we would have held any kind of gathering at a later date for my father. And so I'm just so grateful that we brought people together and gave us all the opportunity to grieve together and to honor him and memorialize him and share and just have that, that's such a gift to be able to do that, to grieve together. And I think it's necessary. And I'm so glad that we did it. Um, I needed it. I realized I really needed it. And it ended up being such a good thing for my family. My siblings were scattered all over, and it brought us together. We needed to come together to plan it together, and it provided us the opportunity to do all the things that people do when they're planning a memorial, to share stories and put your thoughts in some sort of order and share them with other people, and then hear from other people as well. And it was just, it ended up being a beautiful way to do it. So I'm just really convinced that we can do what we need to do through this venue of being online together, especially since, like I said, I don't think we would have done it at all if we hadn't done it online.
and I think there's a good point there that shortly after the death of a loved one, we have an immediate need to come together and to do this kind of sharing. And that, so as you're saying, if we waited 6 months or a year or something, the need would be different at that time. And we might have missed an opportunity when it would have been most helpful to us to share together.
And I will say that it was hard. I mean, we did it 2.5 weeks after he died, and so it was a bit of a scramble to pull it all together. But I think it was good work to be doing at that time. There's some benefit in having something like that to do. It may postpone certain aspects of the grief or some of the grieving work that you need to do. So I did feel a whole nother level of bereavement the Monday after the gathering. It hit me in a new way and very deeply, and I wasn't prepared for that because I think there was just a lot of distraction while I was getting ready for the memorial. So that's the flip side of it. But it's still, overall, I'm really glad we did it when we did it.
Was it challenging to get your siblings and other family members on board with this idea?
Neither of my siblings had heard about this, possibly. Well, one of them had, and the other was pretty skeptical. I mean, just wasn't familiar with, hadn't done many things online, and was, not familiar with the venue. And so I introduced it in a way that was just sharing that I had attended the Zoomerol, they called it, of a family member on the other side of the family in January. And so I was able to share what that experience did for me and what I learned from that gathering. And I came into that gathering very skeptical. When my partner told me about it, I was, like, oh dear, what's this going to be like? Is this really going to do it for us? It's going to be weird. And they talked about having breakout rooms after the formal part of the gathering where everybody was together. And I was skeptical. The whole thing just sounded kind of weird and contrived and worrisome. And I found out that it was really wonderful. And so I was able to actually share that with my siblings, that I understand that it might sound kind of weird, but here's what I learned going through it with this other family member. And so they heard that. And so it was a bit of a challenge, but because we were able to bring together the technical aspects of it and make it easier for everybody, I led them through it. I think that really helped.
And I would think the technical aspects would be a major obstacle for a lot of people. So it really helps to have someone who's familiar with it or has at least used Zoom before.
Ideally, the technical parts should be handled by somebody other than somebody who's grieving. So we did hire a Zoom technical assistant. It happens to be an end-of-life doula who's done this for many families, and that saved us. It is essential to have somebody who really knows the platform, who can handle all the technical aspects, who can handle going back and forth between any, screen sharing, sharing of photos, any music, or also give people instructions about how to use the platform and how to mute themselves, can handle when people don't mute themselves, or can be reading the chat and hearing what people are asking or saying. And our Zoom assistant, Star, also made herself available by phone in case somebody was on Zoom and was having trouble. They could call her and get assistance too. So, and we did a run through ahead of time, and so that made it work.
Oh, that's so nice. That sounds essential because you, as one of the grievers yourself, don't need to be trying to manage the tech. And then I know you mentioned that you also had an MC, which is another great idea to allow you to be a participant and not trying to lead and coordinate the whole thing as it unfolds.
Yes, it is still a ritual, even though it's happening online, and even though it might be secular, it is still important to treat it with, the specialness that it is, the special event that it is. And so I think, really careful planning. We created a script so that everybody would know, what was happening when, for those of us who are planning it, not for the general participants. But we were very careful to have an opening, and where we stated what was going to happen and the purpose of the gathering, and like you would for an opening for any other kind of ritual of marriage or a funeral in real time, in person. And then the person who was kind of coordinating it or emceeing it happened to be a minister who in the family. So we were able to have the minister who gave the opening prayer and the closing prayer be the MC, but there's many ways you can go about that. And then they kind of handled inviting people when to speak and saying what was going to happen next and just putting everybody at ease. And then they also gave the closing and formally closed the event. That's also a very important aspect of a ritual. Yes. So I just encourage people to think of it that way.
And that assistance, it seems really important because all of us have probably been on Zoom calls that have been chaotic, where either everyone's trying to talk at once or no one's talking, and all the many technical problems that can arise in those calls. So hiring help makes so much sense to deal with all of those issues.
That makes it feel safe too. When people know what to expect, they know, okay, here I am, I'm present. It's gonna, this is the order of things. I'm gonna get a chance to speak later. Somebody's in control here. They've set the stage. We've received our instructions so that help us to know, to provide this safe container for what we're doing together. And not just leaving it all up to chance or, like you say, chaos.
Yeah, exactly. Well, would you be willing to describe a little bit about the kind of the format or the script of the ceremony that you held together?
Sure. So when we let everybody know ahead of time that we would be there, we would be on the call early so that if people had difficulties with something, learning something, about Zoom, that we could help them. So before we even started, before the hour, we had to monitor the chat, let people, ask people questions if they needed assistance with anything, and also welcome people. And then there's also a tendency for people to want to just openly talk and say, "Oh, hey, how you doing? And oh, look at your baby," or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so you're trying to navigate some of that. So the minister / MC and the technical assistant needed to navigate that, like to help people, like welcome them and to say hi to each other, but also keep it focused on, does anybody need help? Or, we're going to be starting in 5 minutes or, whatever. So there's that sort of opening waiting room time or waiting time. And then we started right on time. And so the minister, said, we're going to be getting started soon. And then when we did start, he invited the technical assistant to give instructions to everybody. So that makes it really inclusive. So everybody has equal opportunity to understand how to do things, to, how to use the chat, how to mute themselves, how to speak up when they want to speak up, how to scroll through, how to use, the different view, speaker view or gallery view, etc., to help put everybody on equal footing. And then he began with bringing us all together and saying, okay, now we're going to start, and we're going to start with a prayer. And so he said a prayer, and then he said a few words about, my father and who we're honoring. And then he said the layout of what we were going to do. We're going to have some sharing. We're going to have some music. We're going to have a slideshow that, my father's children had put together, that we're going to have the children are each going to share for a little bit. Then we're going to have an open sharing time for brief stories. And then we're going to have some more music, and then a closing prayer. And then we're going to go into breakout rooms. And we divided the breakout rooms into the 3 children. And we had assigned people to breakout rooms so that they could be with people they knew, like my friends and my children and grandchildren came to my breakout room, and same with my brother and my sister. So everybody, he set the stage for all that. And then that was basically our order of things. So we went through all of those different aspects of it, and then he closed it. And then meanwhile, the technical assistant was putting together the breakout rooms so that we could open those up at the end.
The breakout rooms sound like a novel idea, but giving people that opportunity when the formal proceedings were over with, to just be able to connect and then say, hello, oh, your baby's bigger, make all those comments to one another. That sounds like a really nice touch to add.
And sometimes people want to share something, but they don't want to do it in the formal part of the gathering. So it gave them another opportunity for further sharing.
Yeah, that really makes sense. So I was curious about, how did you invite people to attend? And did you ask them to RSVP, or did you just not know how many might be there on that day?
We didn't know exactly. We didn't ask for RSVPs. That could be something that people need to do if they think there might be a lot of people, because depending on your platform and your level of what you pay for, you may not be able to host more than 100 people. So you'd need to know that ahead of time. But we didn't have that problem. We had about 40 different people there, different screens there. So we, let's see, what did we do? I created I made a little bit of a mistake. I created the Zoom event and sent out the link before I had clarified with the person that we hired to be the Zoom technical assistant that our Zoom versions were compatible. And I learned the hard way that it's really important to know that you can do that, because that made it so she could share screen, but there was certain glitches and difficulties. So before you create the meeting and share the link, you should hire your Zoom assistant and perhaps have them be the one who creates the actual meeting on their Zoom platform.
That makes sense, because they'll be the ones with the controls behind the scenes managing things.
Yeah. So we had to do a bit of scrambling at the end. But anyway, we created the meeting and the link, and then we sent it out to everybody who we assumed would want to come, our kids and our close family and close friends and everything. And then beyond that, we asked people if they wanted the link, or called people and asked them. And some people said, no, I won't be able to be there, but I just want to watch the recording. So we were able to turn it into a recording afterwards that we could send to people. And then I did use Facebook, and I did not publish the link on Facebook. I don't recommend that ever. But I asked people to let me know if they wanted the link, and then they personally messaged me one way or another if they wanted the link. And so I sent it to them via email.
So that's really nice. Much like we're talking about your online classes, it does make the service more accessible for some people who could just watch it online and, like we said, don't have to travel anywhere. But then the fact that you can record it so others could view it later, that's also really nice to be able to offer that.
Well, here's an interesting story about that. And don't let me forget to talk about the slideshow too. But my eldest grandchild, who's almost 15, didn't end up getting online through one reason or another. He didn't end up being there for the actual live memorial. And that was really hard for me. And I talked to him afterwards, and he said, Grandma, would you like to watch the recording together? And I said, oh, yes, that would be really comfort. And so we ended up having a special time, just he and I, to watch the recording together online, because he lives very far away. And that ended up being a huge gift and a really special blessing, because we talked about, some of the photos. He got to ask questions. We paused it for a minute. It just ended up being a really special connection between us. And then afterwards, we processed more about my father's death and how important it was, and how fortunate I was to be able to be there at his bedside, to be with his body after he died. I shared that. I talked a little bit about that. I asked him if he had any questions. He ended up saying, Grandma, this sounds like this might be a bad comparison, but I kind of needed that too when my dog died last summer. And I said, oh, that's a great comparison. And I said, would you like to tell me about that? And he opened up and shared with me about that loss, and got very emotional. And I mean, it was just, we ended up talking about like home funerals and, all kinds of things, that we wouldn't have done otherwise,
Oh,
so,
wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really beautiful.
Yeah.
And I can see, because the recording you'll have for years to come. And so it could be used again for even younger grandchildren who didn't get to participate. And
right.
Wow.
Right. So about the slideshow, that is a separate recording that we have. So that was the hardest part. I knew enough to know that I needed help with that, and I started out by just collecting all the siblings in a online shared slideshow presentation. We just collected photos and then went through and sort of weeded them out and added others and put them in some kind of order, and then we sent the whole thing to a cousin who was able to fine tune it, format it, put it, and then add music to it. My husband's a musician, so he played hymns on the piano that we added as a background, and he made a YouTube video out of it. So all we had to do was start the YouTube video. So that made it completely easy to do. But that was a technical piece that this cousin actually has a business doing. So that's a piece that I really advise people to hammer out the details of the technology of that as early as possible.
Yeah. It sounds so special though, like a really important part of the entire ceremony that you had.
It was a huge focal point, and I'm just so grateful that we have that 7-minute piece embedded in the overall recording, but that we can show by itself.
Yeah, gosh, these are such treasures that you have now to keep over time that I'm sure they'll become even more valuable as time goes on.
Mm-hmm.
And so, are there other, well, I don't know if we should, I guess, other tips that you have to share about putting this all together?
I did offer to, there were people that I knew that weren't very familiar with online venues, and I, personally called older family members or whoever, and offered to practice with them ahead of time so they could get comfortable with it. And that was helpful. And then again, having the Zoom technical assistant available by phone ended up being useful during the memorial gathering. Somebody did use that service to get help how to mute and unmute so she could speak. Yeah, it's just the script and the tech run through the night or well ahead of time. If you can do it earlier than the night before to hammer out any details that you didn't think about. Practicing having somebody to help monitor any messages that come in the chat so that you can make sure you're reading anything anybody added or answering any questions there. There's a wonderful article in Wired magazine that just came out on the 17th by Debbie Waldman about how to pay your respects in an online funeral that gives really great practical tips for those who are planning to attend. Things like, taking it seriously, showing up on time, dressing up, sitting still, making sure you know how to mute and unmute yourself, and sort of etiquette kinds of things like that, which I found really helpful.
And I know you mentioned something about the MC or the minister had a time for open sharing when anyone could share, but also invited people to just type in a story into the chat box as an alternative to saying it out loud. I thought that was a really nice idea.
Yeah. And, we wanted people to be able to share, but we also didn't want it to go on too long. So we kind of set the stage for that by saying we now have a few more minutes for sharing. If a few of you want to share a brief story or memory, just sort of emphasizing that, and monitoring that and making sure that didn't go on too long too.
Yeah, I think you're right, because people do get fatigued looking at the screen for such a long time.
I also have been reading though about these Zoom gatherings that sometimes go on for hours.
Huh.
So I think every family's different, what they need, and what people can always leave and come back or whatever. So it's going to be different for every family.
Yeah, that's true. Do you feel that are there any downsides to doing this virtual memorial that you discovered?
I always have been thinking that it's better to do it in person if you can, and that you would only do this if you can't do it in person. But now I'm wondering if there's not going to be a huge business in creating virtual ways for people to be present virtually who can't be there in person, so that more people can participate without having, to travel if they can't travel there. So I think we're going to see, I think they're always going to be around now, that people are going to choose to keep doing it this way, even if they could meet in person. And or there's going to be some kind of hybrid approach to it.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, because I think many more of us have gotten used to doing things online. It's not so much of an obstacle now that it was a year ago, perhaps. And it does seem to me like the advantages of it are significant. That in just the fact that more people can attend who would like to be there, but otherwise wouldn't have been able to travel.
Mm-hmm.
One person that I had talked to in the past mentioned something she was a little surprised by. She hadn't realized, when you're at an in-person funeral, everyone is usually facing straight ahead, straight forward, and you don't really see the faces of the other people who are attending the funeral, but that online, you're actually looking at everyone's faces. Mm-hmm. And I hadn't thought of that before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I did find myself looking around and kind of scrolling through the two screens, so that I could see everybody. And it was really nice that most people did keep their video on for most of it. And I think that's another piece of the etiquette, that you can ask people to do that. Of course, if they can't, that's okay. But I think that's a nice piece of it, is to be able to keep seeing each other.
Yes, definitely. Mm-hmm. Let's see. Anything else that comes to mind that you would want to share? Do you feel that it was helpful for you with your grief to have this online ceremony that you did?
Oh, very much, very much. I needed it. I knew I needed it, and I knew I wanted to do it, but I didn't realize how helpful it would be, and it was hugely helpful. And I've looked back over the recording several times, and it's been so meaningful to have that. And I'm so glad that we chose to do it.
Yes, it sounds like it. I'm hoping that other people will feel inspired, that it's okay to give this a try and search for the helpers they need to help them create it, but that it's worthwhile to do it and worth the effort that it takes to put together.
Yeah, I fear that there's going to be a lot of businesses springing up that are charging a lot of money to make it easier for people to do it. And I really hope that there'll be people that continue to provide this service for the technical pieces at a very low cost, so that anybody can do it. And I just want to encourage people that it is possible to do it yourself, with just a little bit of help from your friends and some good planning. And there's tons of resources online, the articles that I've mentioned, and many others that give really good practical tips about it. So you don't have to spend a lot of money to do it.
Yeah,
and you know what? We're human. We're all human. And if there's glitches, there's glitches. People have learned to be patient with that kind of stuff. So it's going to be okay.
Yes, exactly. And so much better than putting it off and deciding maybe we'll do something later, or just giving up and deciding, I guess we can't do anything, so we won't. I think it's just so important for us to come together, whether it is in person or virtually, because I loved the quote that you had, that yes, the love can travel through Wi-Fi. And I thought that was really beautiful.
Yeah. And I was kind of blown away how many friends and colleagues chose to attend. That was so meaningful.
Yeah, very special. I was thinking, well, the one thing that you can't duplicate online is the food.
Right? And that's a huge part of our culture, all cultures, gathering and mourning and sharing food.
Yeah. I guess I could picture it, though, like if your loved one was a good cook or had a special dish that they would make, then everyone could make it themselves. You could send out the recipe and you could all make it and eat it afterwards as a special remembrance.
I was really touched by the people that either sent me money or gift certificates to order food, or brought food to my doorstep and left it, or sent, packaged food through the mail. So food is still coming through.
That's good, because it is so important. I mean, it's primal, but it's just such an important need. And so it's nice that people are still cognizant of that and still helping to meet those needs.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, I just so appreciate you sharing this with us, Merilynne, knowing especially that it's tender and so very personal, but it's so helpful. And I feel like these suggestions you've had will actually encourage someone out there to go ahead and have their own virtual memorial service or funeral.
I hope so.
Yeah, I hope so too. And I just want to thank you again, Merilynne, for joining me today and for all the amazing work that you're doing in the world.
Thank you so much, Karen. It's always a pleasure being with you and speaking with you.
Well, I hope we get to speak again sooner than in 1 year, perhaps, this time around. And so
Me too.
Take care.
You too. Thank you so much.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Merilynne. I really appreciate her sharing with us so generously about her experiences with her father's memorial service. And I was also really touched to hear how beautiful and profound that service was, even though it was offered online. And I love the quote from Stephen Birnbaum from the New York Times saying, "Wi-Fi carries the love quite effectively." So I do believe that one thing we've learned through this year of pandemic is how to use our technology to still share the love that we want to share with one another and to still be able to come together. And I love the idea that these virtual funerals and memorials allow people from everywhere to attend and be part of an event that otherwise they may not have participated in because of living too far away and not being able to travel to be there in person. So I think there is a lot of potential for these events going forward, and I'm sure that we're going to be coming up with even more innovations and ideas and think of even more clever ways to hold virtual events for our loved ones. I really loved that she ran through the details of how to structure it and schedule it, gave us her best practices and tips. It's so very, very helpful. So I hope you took notes on this episode in case you are planning a virtual funeral, because Merilynne just had so much to say. Also, she did send us a link to an article that she wrote that contains many of these tips, and it's available in the show notes if you'd like to download it. If you are seriously planning a virtual memorial, you may want to download and print her article because you'll have all the tips in writing then. So once again, my greatest gratitude to Merilynne for sharing with us. And you know what? We're all learning as we go through this process. None of us really knows everything we need to know yet. We're all learning it together as we go. And so this is the very best thing we can do. Just share with one another what we're learning in hopes that it helps someone else. So I hope that's how you feel after listening to today's interview. And, if you found it helpful for yourself, that's great. Please think of passing it on or sharing this episode with someone else who might be in the situation of wanting to plan a virtual ceremony of some type. And also consider subscribing to the podcast on whatever platform you happen to listen to podcasts, and leave a review and a rating, because that really helps me grow the community of people who care about the end of life. And I appreciate all of you so much who have left reviews in the past. So, remember, there will be a new episode, another interview next week. You can tune in again for more content. And until then, remember that we're here for love. So face your fear, be ready for whatever comes next, and love each and every moment of this very precious life. Bye-bye.